Hello, David. It's extremely nice to have you on the podcast today.
Thank you.
And you've been known as a historian, as the person who is not afraid to speak uncomfortable truth. And I'm curious, this might be the question that not many people asked you, but after everything you've done, after everything you've experienced, after all the battle against cancel culture, how would you describe yourself and how would you like to get remembered?
Interesting. I'm now very ancient. I just celebrated my 80th birthday. I've had really several lives. You know, there's the business in English of cats having 9 lives. I haven't quite had 9 lives, but I've had very different lives as time has gone on, and I've wandered in different directions. I remember back in the 1990s, somebody who I was then very close to, very distinguished fellow historian, a man called Conrad Russell, the Earl Russell, Bertrand Russell's youngest son, said to me, "David, you don't know what you want to do." And I've always been one of those people who's tended to go in some ways, you describe me as words like, courage, saying uncomfortable truths, suggesting that there's a kind of noble directed path. That's not quite what happened. If I go back to the beginning of my career as an academic, I was in the 1960s, 70s. It was totally straightforward academic career. Most of the greats, I was not particularly interested in politics. Now, there were things about me that are consistent. The business of the speaking of the mind, the asking uncomfortable truths, challenging received opinion, but I was doing it within my own discipline. I was doing it within Tudor history. So I famously had a major dispute with my great mentor, with Geoffrey Elton, Sir Geoffrey Elton, challenging him, daring to challenge him directly on his central thesis about the development of English government. And I remember, and it's very important to recognise how ambiguous relationships like these are, that it began as somebody that I immensely valued, that I deeply respected, that taught me really to think seriously about history for the first time in my life. But even when I was an undergraduate in his special subject class in my 3rd year, I did what I suppose was really rather unthinkable. I corrected him on a document that I've always had. Clearly, I'm interested in the arts. I'm devoted to languages, and so on. But I've always had a quasi-scientific mind. When I was a schoolboy, up to what we call the point at which you specialise, up to what were then known as O-levels, before you went into the 6th form, my best subjects were physics and chemistry. But I wasn't a good enough natural mathematician to go on and do the natural sciences, and I was very lucky. There were 2 other boys in my class who, like me, went to Cambridge, but to study, in their case, the natural sciences, me to study history. So history was the art subject which was nearest, if you like, to the scientific approach. And indeed, in French, you talk about the historical sciences, meaning that it is systematic study, that there is the valuing of precision, of accuracy, of the careful comparison of documents and whatever. And I've always been very, very good at that. I know I have the reputation of flamboyance and all the rest of it, which I do, but I happen underneath it to have this rather uncomfortably rigorous scholarship. I'm even good at things like financial history, which, bearing in mind how extravagant I am in personal life, rather surprises people. Anyway, I began by actually challenging Elton on his classification of a document. I can't now remember whether he'd called it a proclamation, it was in fact a circular letter, or it was to sheriffs, or the other way around. But anyway, I was right. And he took it very, very well. and clearly regarded this as a testament if somebody was bright. But anyway, when I went on I got first-class degree, I was meeting him in the summer, this would be the summer of 1967, after I graduated. I knew I was going to become his research student. He treated one very well. He was one of the few people at Cambridge at that point to treat research students as real human beings rather than people that you just saw occasionally. So he welcomed me to his home, which was then a little house in Pretoria Road. He was just about to move into a grand pile that the immense success of his books on Tudor history had bought for him in Millington Road, but I was told not to talk about that. Anyway, we went to the pub, and I shocked him by asking for gin and tonic rather than a pint, and he clearly thought, I got a rum one here. And then he said, right, you're a bright boy, you're going to do the Exchequer. I said, no.
Oh.
And I said, I want to study the royal court. Oh, I've shown it's of no importance. I don't think I quite said at that point, I don't believe you. But what I did, I told him why I had grave doubts, that my second undergraduate essay was actually on Anne Boleyn, the second queen of Henry VIII. And how on earth was I in 1964? Nobody wrote about women, it wasn't yet fashionable. Why was I doing it? I was doing it because I'd had an extraordinary experience of doing very well at school, going up to a rather second-grade college at Cambridge, let's be truthful, Fitzwilliam. It wasn't even a college at that point. It was desperately trying to become one. And we had a very, very mixed group of supervisors. And I had a woman called Helen Clover. And she was a medievalist. She specialised in transcribing the lives of minor Celtic saints. And at the end of my first class with her on Tudor history, my first supervision, and the man who was with me is still alive, Chris Widows, and can actually testify to this. At the end of that class, she said to me, you know more about this than I do.
Wow.
Catastrophic, how stupid. To a bumptious, a bit like you, a bumptious 19-year-old, full of himself and whatever. Anyway, but what she then said, well, go and do different things. And I did an essay on Margaret Beaufort, which was terrible, and I found her very unsympathetic, though I've since become very interested in her. But the one on Anne Boleyn, because there was an amazing 19th century book, and of course terribly old-fashioned then, nobody read it, by a man called Paul Friedman, which used the large swathes of the original dispatches of the imperial ambassador Eustache Chapuis, and my French was very good then. I'd spent a stretch of time in France between school and Cambridge, so I read it all very easily, and it became clear to me at that point that there was a whole world of politics round Henry VIII, very, very much like the thing round Trump. The thing that's clear about Trump is a monarch. He sees himself as a monarch. Mar-a-Lago is a palace. You remember when his Secretary of State, when Mario Rubio went into the Élysée Palace, magnificent, gilded, Louis XVI interior in France. He said to an absolutely appalled President Macron, "Oh, this looks just like Mar-a-Lago, which is plastered in vulgar gold leaf, but it is the court, and you can see Trump operating like a monarch, the use of the signature, the performance and the signing of documents, the surrounding with a clique of people like Elon Musk that own no elective office at all, but are in favour. So that I'd already discovered that world as an undergraduate, and when I was 19, that was always in my mind. So when I read, well, I was already familiar with Elton's thesis that somehow under Henry VIII, government became bureaucratic, depersonalised, that Thomas Cromwell invented instruments of state like the Privy Council, which excluded the king, Henry VIII, for God's sake, from real power. I knew it was rubbish. I'd already realised that there were ways that you could simply show that it was. And again, the idea that the king was actually not simply pushed out of the central political process, but more importantly, out of the control of the inner instruments of government. And again, Trump has revived these things, which is why I think he's got this gut appeal to people. Unlike most modern politicians, you can actually see power in operation with him. You can see how here is an individual who has changed things, who's determined to impose his will, all the sorts of things that have largely vanished from Western politics. But I knew that that's what Henry VIII did. I knew that his signature, I knew that whoever was responsible for getting that signature, that was where power was, where it operated. That couldn't be separated from the king. So I had this, at a very early stage, I knew what I wanted to do. I knew that it was challenging. It would undercut. It would tear down what was the accepted structure of Tudor history. And do you know what? I did it. To begin with, Elton was good and with a degree of grumpiness, sort of accepted it. But the tension, and I played down the extent to which it undercut his argument about a Tudor revolution. But of course, the tensions came to the surface as I became older, more independent, started to publish more, write more, and eventually we had a most terrible public quarrel in which he tried to destroy not only my reputation, but that of those who'd worked with me. And I replied with a devastating article, which I remember the editor of the Historical Journal, John Morrill had waved his finger at me. He said, you know, there's got to be no fisticuffs in this. It's got to be all got to be kept very polite. And I got the note back saying, yes, it is polite, but you politely dip him in an acid bath feet first. So what I'm saying is, at that point, I had very, very little. Remember, this is the 1960s, 68 going on around me. I barely noticed. I was a little involved in student politics. I had returned, I'd been in London for a stretch of time, working in what was then called the Public Records Office, then becomes nowadays we've imitated America and called it the National Archives. I was there for a stretch of time. I came back to my college at Cambridge. By this time it was a college. It was being convulsed by student politics. And I played a sort of, in looking back, it's rather interesting. I played a mediating role as a known figure in the college, in the middle common room, that's as it was called then, between the undergraduate common room and the senior common room. I played a mediating role, and I actually wrote a constitution for the student representative body in the college, which in one form or another has actually lasted to the present, despite the fact that the college spat me out because I was far too naughty. That's a recent development. But what I did, and in retrospect, I'm really interested by it, I gave the college, the college student body, a constitution that was deliberately modelled on that of the United States. And that's to say, in which the leader of the student body was not chosen out of a small cliquish committee, the way you've been describing how student politics become so violent and whatever. You get a little committee, a cliquish committee elected that's more and more extreme. That's very much the sort of thing that happens with the French Revolution, where you get, the Committee of Public Safety and whatever, Robespierre going more and more and more extreme. What I did was to take the countervailing model, which is the American model, because the founding fathers of America were, of course, soaked in the traditions of English parliamentary government, of English representative government. And they came up with the idea of a president who is subject to a form of general election. So you choose this monarchical figure that has to, as it were, be supported by a very large group of people. Now that's an incredibly effective way of marginalising fanatics and silly people. It's a very, very good way of stopping it happening. So even then, I think I had a degree of a political flair, even though I wasn't hugely interested in politics. And then what happened was my dissertation, my PhD, was very distinguished. I got one of the only 2 jobs that were available in the year that I finished it, in the year that I had to leave my research position at Cambridge in 1972. I went to LSE and whatever, and I seemed to be about to embark on a completely ordinary, successful academic career.